Mr. Jackson, this is the hearing room. Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. The Committee on Military Personnel will come to order. I want to welcome the hearing presentations today. We're going to hear from those who have an interest in or are connected with professional military education and the National Defense Strategy. This is the second committee hearing that we have had on this topic, and I commend the ranking member for making this a priority. We are here to discuss with the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Staff the Department's processes for developing and deploying professional education to service members that is relevant, flexible, and delivers value to the armed forces given the investment in time and taxpayer dollars. This content prepares officers charged to advance and execute our future national military strategy and ultimately become the senior leaders responsible for the defense of the nation. We will also hear from our panel of outside witnesses on their thoughts on the Department's professional military education enterprise and their recommendations for change. From our OSD and Joint Staff panel, I want to hear not only about the need for this ongoing education, but what is intended and the actual return on the significant investment of both time and resources, estimated at over $8 billion a year, and how that return is measured. I'm also concerned about these programs becoming very insular and not taking into consideration educational experts outside of the Department of Defense to consider their insights in the development and execution of relevant educational content, as well as maintenance of accreditation. We must make sure that our leaders remain on the cutting edge of intellectual, technological, and educational development necessary for the changing character and conduct of operations. The Office of the Secretary of Defense has been in charge of professional military education for 30 years, but it appears to have operated on autopilot and with little oversight by DoD or Congress. The need for swift change in this arena must match the evolving strategy in a rapidly changing world. I'm convinced that the professional military education system is flexible enough to, I'm not convinced that the professional military education system is flexible enough to modify and adapt the curriculum promptly to keep pace with changing defense needs. It needs attention of leadership and follow-through. I want to ensure that these educational opportunities are not used for career box checking, but are used to enhance the warfighter's intellectual rigor, or as Chairman Milley states, the, quote, intellectual overmatch, unquote, that is necessary to increase critical strategic thinking, leading to increased competence and effectiveness of our fighting force. I'm also very interested to hear from our civilian witnesses their opinions of robustness and effectiveness of the current system of professional military education, and any and all recommendations they have for the improvement of the education continuum. Before hearing from our witnesses, let me offer Ranking Member Gallagher an opportunity to make his opening remarks.
Well, I thank you, Chairwoman Spear, for your interest in this topic. I want to thank both of our panels for being with us today. I will start with a quote that is sometimes attributed to Thucydides, other times attributed to Sir Francis Butler, depends on what you reference. But I'm sure you've heard it before, which is that a nation that makes a great distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its laws made by cowards and its wars fought by fools. The stakes with professional military education and its intersection with the national defense strategy is absolutely critical to the defense of our nation. The threats to America include an increasingly aggressive China, a revanchist Russia. The threat of Salafi jihadism has not gone away. Cyber criminals attack us every single day. And of course, unique challenges we've all faced in the last 2 years related to the pandemic. The list goes on and on. The bottom line is we have to ensure our readiness through an unyielding commitment to outthinking our opponents, whether they are state actors or cyber criminals or non-state terrorist groups. We have to get this right. This past December, we had a subcommittee briefing, and I started with a statement from the 2018 National Defense Strategy, which said, quote, PME has stagnated, focused more on the accomplishment of mandatory credit at the expense of lethality and ingenuity, unquote. I also mentioned the need to harness the power of wargaming, which I think we're not doing enough of. In today's hearing, I would like to get into these issues. I would like to understand what's changed in our approach since we've had that initial briefing, how we can ensure that we have the right system for PME, and by extension, that our military leaders are prepared to fight and win in any conflict, and as well as just understand the future of warfare. The challenge here is whether we have the institutions and organizational wherewithal within our military to do this, or does the current system of PME need a fresh look and a transformational change? We need to hear the thoughts of both panels on this, and we also need to know what your constraints are and how we can get after this and support you in the right way. In my mind, PME should be something that inspires intellectual curiosity and the critical thinking of our service members. It should be the result of a meritocratic culture that assures the best and brightest are afforded the opportunity to lead and to hone their craft as thinkers and as warriors. And so I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. I thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member, and we'd now like to welcome our first witnesses and our first panel. First is retired General of the U.S. Marine Corps, Robert Schmidl, did I say that right? Jr., Professor of Practice at the School of Politics and Global Studies at the Arizona State University, and Professor Joan Johnson Fries, National Security Affairs, Naval War College, Newport, Rhode Island. Mr. Schmidl, you may begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spear and Ranking Member Gallagher and the other members of the subcommittee. I first want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to address the issue of professional military education and the National Defense Strategy. Although this subject has been investigated before, it seems to me that what makes this such a pressing issue today is the rise of China. China is the first true peer adversary we've had to deal with in many years. China has the economic, technical, and manpower resources that make it perhaps the most severe threat that we have faced. Because of this, it is a matter of great consequence that the professional military education system produces the very finest officers who are both thinkers and doers. In examining the state of military education, the first thing that I think we should consider is answering the following question. What do we want our senior military and civilian leaders to be able to do? What are the characteristics and attributes we want them to have? We want them to be creative, to be innovative, to be critical thinkers. Answering this question is fundamental to identifying areas of concern and opportunity, and seems to me that this, in fact, is a question for the Congress. It is important to remember that while we, the U.S. military, are unmatched on the battlefield, the many tactical victories we have achieved have not always been relevant to enabling strategic success. Ensuring a coherent relationship between tactics and strategy is part of a long-term campaign model is critical to maintaining America's place in the world order. The most effective and enduring methods, in my experience, for achieving this relationship is through realistic and rigorous wargaming, especially at the classified level. The example of War Plan Orange is very instructive. War Plan Orange was the plan for the defeat of Japan in the Second World War. War Plan Orange was created initially out of seminars at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and for many, many years, they would war game a rising Japan in the South Pacific. And when we finally went to war with Japan, the senior leaders actually had in their minds an operational design for what that conflict was going to look like and what that plan would look like. And that came from the wargaming that was done for many years at Newport. Previous efforts at reforming professional military education have only been successful because of congressional leadership. As I suggested in my written testimony, a congressional commission similar to the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, I think would be a great first step. I was fortunate to be on the red team for that commission, and I was very impressed with the level and the depth of knowledge and understanding of the nuances of cyber operations among the commissioners. I had just come from being the first deputy commander of Cyber Command, and I was relatively familiar with those things. So I was very impressed with the methodology and the leadership of that commission, and I think that that would be a great way for us to begin to understand the issues, their potential solutions, and to start crafting legislation to put them in place. Two things that I think we should keep in mind as we consider the implications of professional military education. First, investing in human capital has a much bigger payoff than investing in technology alone. As some on this committee know personally, technology by itself doesn't fight wars. It doesn't win wars. People using technology fight wars, and people ultimately make decisions that win or lose wars. The Department of Defense budgets should in fact reflect the outsized importance of applying appropriate resources to professional military education, and most of all to wargaming. Second, I think we need to take a holistic approach to military education, understanding the inescapable linkages to service personnel and promotion policies. The example of Goldwater-Nichols and the effect that it had on joint duty is, again, instructive. Prior to Goldwater-Nichols, there was officers were not in a hurry to go to joint duty. It was considered a pariah. But after Goldwater-Nichols, when it became apparent that the Congress had run out of patience with giving waivers to the Department of Defense for promotion to general officer, it suddenly became the cause célèbre, and the best and the brightest of the 06s we had, colonels and Navy captains were trying to get into joint positions so that we could, in fact, that they would be eligible for promotion. And I think that we are all the better for it. Our joint force is obviously the better for that. So I think that is a good example of how we could actually legislate and start to move the needle on this. The most important contribution that professional military education makes to national defense strategy is preparing senior officers and civilians for all that we can confidently know about the future, and that is that it will be uncertain. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. We'll now hear from Dr. Johnson-Fries.
How do I get it on? Representative Spear, thank you. Representative Spear, Representative Gallagher, and members of the subcommittee. It is an honor and a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today about professional military education, a field I've worked in since 1993. The focus of my remarks will be on the degree-granting institutions, specifically command staff and war colleges, as that is where my experience lies. And while I'm currently a faculty member at the Naval War College, the views I'm expressing today are strictly my own. There is much that has improved in PME during my nearly 30-year career. Adherence to the principles of academic freedom, the foundation for quality teaching and recruiting top teachers, is now embedded in most PME programs. There has also been a slow and steadily growing recognition that it is not the purpose of either the intermediate or senior level courses to better prepare each individual attendee for their next billet, a mistake that long dominated PME. Military officers need to be educated for the arc of the rest of their careers rather than the next assignment. Another improvement is that we see far fewer moments when senior officers take to the stage to welcome students with statements like, "It's only a lot of reading if you do it." Clearly, however, some services and some military branches still encourage, respect, and appreciate education more than others. The hybrid nature of PME institutions creates three general types of stresses and challenges that remain particularly problematic. First, establishing clarity on the goal of the academic program. Second, defining the institution's expectations of the students and what those students should expect to get out of the program. And third, having the most effective mix of civilian academics, active duty and retired military professionals, and national security practitioners to best implement the academic program. I suggest beginning with consideration of three recommendations. First, accentuate that Congress's goal for PME is education, not training. PME should produce leaders who are intellectually agile, questioning, critical and strategic thinkers who can broadly anticipate future challenges, and consequently most effectively be ready to employ U.S. forces for maximum effect and lethality. Second, institutionalize a two-track PMA pathway for students, one for students who seek only to complete requirements and one for those who want to pursue a graduate degree. This is important because we have found that most students do in fact want to complete a master's level program. Indeed, that was the reason for accrediting the program in the first place. But some students chafe at degree program requirements, and that minority should be allowed to pursue a smaller and more circumcised program. And third, address issues consistently identified as problems on command climate surveys. In my experience, these problems consistently include transparency in decision-making, hiring and promotions, narrow communications within institutions, and long-standing problems of inclusion and diversity. To that end, DoD should collect data on faculty and administration towards increased diversity through demographics, backgrounds, and expertise. These statistics are often very closely held within institution, but in my experience, I would estimate that PME college-level administration, which has grown significantly in past years, is overwhelmingly composed of retired military. This lopsidedness persists because of inertia in hiring practices. As one of my students explained to me, ducks pick ducks. Few or none of this group of administrators have experience in academic life or higher education before coming to PME. More data on which groups are hired more often, have been hired at higher or lower pay, and are promoted more often into more senior positions would go a long way at getting a more accurate picture of faculty at PME institutions. Clarity here would help dispel faculty perceptions of unfairness if such perceptions are erroneous. If such perceptions are accurate, however, and I suspect many of them are, more data would allow for more accurate course corrections and institutional improvement. Until this problem is addressed, inertia and status quo within the institutions will prevail. I elaborate on each of these areas in my written testimony and would be happy to answer questions from that elaboration. Thank you for the opportunity to share my views.
Thank you both. Let me start with you, Mr. Schmidl. This congressional commission that you have conceived was intriguing to me. Who would you recommend be put on that kind of a commission?
Well, I think that, again, I go back to the Solarium Commission and the members that were on, the commissioners that were on that, many of whom I knew, but I would suggest that you need a mix of people that are on the civilian side that are experts, as well as on the military side. I mean, I think what I would be most inclined to do would be to pick a chairman and a co-chair and then have them begin to cogitate on who they wanted in there. You know, in my experience, I'm also on the faculty at Arizona State University, so I've had a chance to see this on both sides. I'm a student of the PME process. I went to Command and Staff College as a major. I went to the War College, the Marine Corps War College, as a lieutenant colonel, and then I taught at the Marine Corps University after that, because that, in those days, in the mid to late 90s, that was part of the payback. They sent us to the War College, and then we went and were on the faculty. So I think a diverse group of people to pick up on something that Joan just mentioned a minute ago about retired military. You know, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I think that we could legislate career paths that would encourage the best and the brightest officers to be faculty in our universities, and that their career paths, that they wouldn't have to make a decision between a career path that would lead to promotion and one that would not. Recognizing that I have really not answered your question, I just think that it would require, I mean, there are some things that I've seen in the civilian academic world that I think would be very useful for us to import. But I think there's also some rigor that is called for in the military schools, especially when we get into things like wargaming, that really need to be and can best be taught by people with an operational background.
All right, thank you. What percentage of the faculty, Dr. Johnson-Fries, would you recommend be civilian?
Not just the faculty, but administration,
Mm-hmm.
a third.
A third. And how about wargaming? What percentage of the curriculum should be wargaming?
What percentage of the curriculum? Again, I can speak only to my experience, that it usually is part of the military operations course, whatever it's called, and it is the kind of culminating exercise. So I would estimate it's probably somewhere between 10 and 20% of the overall curriculum, but I would suggest that, for example, in my department, we have an exercise that is not wargaming per se, but it is an exercise which puts students in the position of have to think about force planning and having to think about how you match force planning with strategy. So there are elements of wargaming practices that are throughout the curriculum.
What percentage of the curriculum at the War College that you have been part of for all these years is Socratic versus seminar engagement?
Well, as I pointed out in my testimony, we aim for Socratic method teaching, but it's very difficult to go into a classroom where the vast majority of the students are coming from a STEM background. Most of them are engineers. They've come from the military academies. And when you try and have a discussion that starts off with something like, what are the pros and cons of alliances for the United States, and the students in the room have absolutely no background in that field, there's a certain amount of teaching that has to go on before you can get into the Socratic method. There's a lot more teaching that has to be done on the basics of social sciences to prepare them for that Socratic method that is very effective.
In one of your articles, you wrote that we should limit the number of retirees hired on War College faculties. Would you like to expand on that?
The retired faculty play a very important role. Some of them leave the military and take on a civilian role and develop their own fields. I have a colleague who's become a expert strategist. I have another colleague who is a marvel at international engagement. They do this, but there are also a pretty strong percentage who use their position or see their position as a faculty member to teach what they have done, and that gets us into teaching the last war. Their currency becomes dated rather quickly. So I would suggest, too, the second part of that is they see the students as a younger version of themselves. And what that means is they understand their stresses, their limitations, and they become as focused on getting the students through comfortably as getting them educated. And we bend over backwards to make things comfortable for the students. I'm sure you remember in college finals week, even in high school, where you might have 2 finals in one day or 3 finals in 2 days. That will never happen at War College. It's spaced out to make it comfortable. When I first got to the Naval War College, we didn't have students read an article. We had a faculty member read it and then do a cliff note to give to the students to make it easier for them. So again, I think the retired military, seeing these young officers as versions of themselves, rigor can become overly balanced with accommodation.
Mr. Schmidl, would you like to comment on any of those questions? Wargaming, what percentage should it be?
So I think if wargaming to me is something that we can do as part of every piece of the syllabus. Wargaming is ultimately theory applied practically. It's a way for us to take sort of the big ideas in life and to say, how would this apply in this case? I think wargaming does something else for us. I think it gives us an opportunity to evaluate officers. And I hear exactly what Joan's saying. My experience in the War College was very different. The Marine Corps, when we stood up the Marine Corps War College, we did it like we did everything else. We went as far overboard as we could, and it was like academic boot camp. But it was an extraordinary year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. There were 12 people in the seminar, and if you hadn't read what was gone the night before, you were going to get embarrassed in front of everybody. And the faculty at the time sort of relished that, and I thought that was okay, because holding people to that standard. The evaluation of students, one of the things that I think we miss an opportunity in the War Colleges is being able to do just that, to look at some of these students and begin to pick out the best and the brightest that are in these War Colleges that are not just there to get the X in the block, but are genuinely the kinds of people that you and Ranking Member Gallagher were talking about, the intellectually curious, the folks that really want to know more about how this big system of ours operates. So I would be inclined to do more wargaming more often and to hold the students accountable for trying to understand the quote, big ideas that are driving a lot of this.
Thank you. My time has expired. Ranking Member Gallagher.
Well, thank you. I apologize, I keep running out. We have a T&I vote series going on right now, so trust me, there's a TV in there. I'm listening to what you're saying as I also vote simultaneously. So, and I very much appreciated both of your thoughtful testimony. General Schmidl, in your testimony, you mentioned a China Hands program. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what benefit you think it would provide to the Defense Department?
I think that, we tried to... There we go. Okay. The Defense Department tried the Afghan Hands program a number of years ago. You may have heard of that. And actually, it was actually pretty popular. I knew a number of officers that wanted to know how to get involved in it. We didn't quite take it to conclusion. It didn't get embedded institutionally, but I think the idea of starting, for instance, a China Hands program. So if you were a young major and you said, hey, I want to get into that program, you would select into it. You wouldn't just decide you wanted to do it. And then you would go to school. You would probably go to a master's degree program in Chinese politics, Chinese geography, Chinese economics. You would learn the language, at least enough of the language to be able to be passively, if not fluent, to be able to read. And you would spend your career in jobs that were continually focused on China. So you might spend a couple years in the Pentagon, then you might go to the Indo-PACOM staff, continuing to get promoted, and this is something that we would have to ensure was happening, and then come back to the Pentagon so that the Secretary of Defense had a group of folks that he could go to outside of OSD policy, which, as you know, has a large turnover of folks in there, but a core group of people that truly understood China and the Chinese issues and the Chinese culture. We had a de facto experience like this in the 60s and 70s with the Sovietologists, right? We had a lot of people in the Department of Defense that just knew the Soviet Union and that knew the Russian people and the issues that were there, that we never really thought about it because that was the peer threat. And this was just a suggestion that I had, that as a way to kickstart and to generate interest in furthering the education and giving these young officers access to the Secretary with their suggestions.
Can I, so you mentioned War Plan Orange, phenomenal book, very eye-opening. As I understand it, or if memory serves, the key was that you had students, active duty, in this case at the Naval War College, whose work was then being fed into the actual war plan.
Absolutely.
And then it evolved
Absolutely.
over time. I mean, what's remarkable is they got the basic idea kind of right, but made significant adjustments throughout. Is there any such connectivity going on right now between the wargaming happening at our national war colleges and the actual O plans such as they exist?
I really don't know. I suspect that it may not be as tight of a loop, but
And I'll allow Dr. Fries to, if you seem like you had a thought on that.
Yeah, one of the things that's happened over the past 10 years has been an increasing recognition within the war colleges that there's a lot of external experts that you can bring in to work with. The war college used to be very insular.
Yeah.
There's now a recognition that the way you get expertise and the way you develop expertise is to work with outside institutions. At one time, faculty were discouraged from doing that, but that is slowly changing. So you've got this breadth of expertise, not just on China, but on China, on the Middle East, on name the area of the world that you can work with. And as again, recently, Russian studies has come back into vogue, which was very much in vogue during the Cold War. But we don't need to develop them all within the war colleges because, again, languages, Chinese. My son took Chinese for 6 years, and I think he would say he speaks Chinese like a first grader. So it's a long process to develop expertise. We can't develop them in a 10-month program, but we can make them aware of the questions they need to ask to find the experts who are there. And I think that's an important thing to do.
Well, the other thing that I'm concerned about is we invest this money and time into some of our best and brightest, although there's a dispute as to whether we're selecting our best and brightest, depending on the institution. Are we then putting them in operational assignments that reflects the year or 2 years they just spent working on a particular intellectual problem? I only have 14 seconds. Yeah. I gotta vote. Yeah.
I think we would find out that it's probably episodic.
I can only say, based on what my students tell me, rarely.
Okay. I'm listening again. I swear.
Dr. Johnson-Fries, I believe in your testimony you recommended that it not be focused on the next position that officer is going to have, but their totality of the arc of their term in the military.
When I started in PME, there was the idea that we were supposed to preparing them for their next job. Well, when your seminar is 12 students and one is a pilot and one is a nurse and one's a ship driver, one's in cyber, you can't prepare them. That is training. That is training. What we are preparing them to do is to recognize long-term threats, to think strategically. Getting away from that idea of preparing them for their next job has been incremental, but I think we've made a great deal of progress in that area.
Thank you. Next is gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our panel for speaking. I served in the military and was a Russian. I took a bunch of Russian as well back in the day, and my dad actually was a Navy guy. and went to Naval War College amongst other terrific professional education opportunities. So I'm really excited to kind of learn your perspective. And I had a specific question for it must be Dr. Johnson-Fries or Ms. Johnson-Fries. You suggested in your testimony that the department should utilize a 2-track PME pathway for students, for those who were pursuing master's degrees and those who sought only to complete their PME. And we've often heard that non-commissioned officers and petty officers are the backbone of the armed forces, and about 82% of the forces are enlisted. And so my question to you is, given how strongly that we rely on the enlisted folks and ongoing efforts to recruit and retain these qualified folks, would you also recommend similarly that pathways apply to enlisted for PME?
I'm not as familiar with the education system that deals with NCOs, but I know we have included on a very selective basis, included them into our programs. And I think, again, many students come to us and say, I've got 2 masters. I don't need another master's. I would rather spend that time doing something else. And frankly, there are just students who aren't interested for whatever reason, and they don't add much to the seminar. I had a student say, so I did all the reading, did all the work, and I'm going to get an A-, and the man next to me who didn't spill his coffee every day is going to get a B+. Let him take a more condensed version and get him out of the classroom, and add more interagency people, add more international, add some of the NCOs. That creates a more interesting and useful mix.
So you're saying that you could increase capacity if you change the mix of what people's aspirations were in terms of the end result of the program?
Absolutely.
And that's interesting. My other question, you also did spoke a lot about sort of diversity of the staff and faculty. And you spoke a little bit about, I think what you were saying is measuring what mattered and being able to have the data in front of us as to what that diversity looks like, where people are coming from, so that you can see what sort of efficacy results from that diversity. Is that indeed what you were indicating a need for, is an understanding of what the faculty looks like at these various institutions?
What the faculty looks like, and equally, if not more important, what the administration looks like. I would argue that the administration in PME throughout the institutions is overwhelmingly retired military. And that's rather like having a hospital. If everybody running the hospital is a surgeon, they're going to have the same answer to pretty much every medical question. When you have a war college where everybody is retired military, you don't get much diversity of thought. So my argument is that since it is active duty, retired military, professional academics, and practitioners, there ought to be some kind of mix in there to get diversity of viewpoint. And it is not a matter of PhD and non-PhD. It's a matter of, where did you come from? What is your background? Did you have experience in education? Are you aware of what it takes to succeed as an academic? As opposed to many of the retired military will go on to get a PhD at a night school program, maybe in the field they're working in, maybe not. So it's not PhD, non-PhD, is what was your background when you came in to give you what diversity of thought. And I think that will remove a lot of the inertia and status quo that has prevailed.
And with my remaining seconds, would love to understand from Mr. Schmidl, General Schmidl, you mentioned the fact that I'm trying to remember what the angle was. I'm sorry, I've lost the train of thought. That was really important, but I'm sure it'll come to me. And with that, I guess I'll yield back because I've forgotten what I wanted to ask you about.
So if I could comment on the question you asked
course.
about accreditation. So the question that we might ask ourselves is, if we were not concerned with accreditation for master's programs, what would that free up in terms of bandwidth at the war colleges to potentially teach things that we're not teaching today? And the extent to which that accreditation actually impacts us at that level might be something to think about. The other thing is, with regard to the administration, the question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we incentivize civilian faculty to join the administration of a war college? I mean, Jones brought up some great points. If everybody there is a surgeon and their answer is going to be, well, let's do some exploratory cutting and figure out what the problem is. So
Yeah.
I just think if we could consider those two things, that might be useful.
No, I appreciate it, and I know my time is up. I did remember what I was going
All
to
right,
ask
go ahead
you
and
about,
ask your question.
Thank you. Which was, when you talk, both of you have talked about the balance between rigor and, making sure you don't alienate the population, your student population. I also was a chemistry teacher for a time, so I do understand that as well. But my challenge is, you also mentioned that it made a huge difference when it was part of a person's career path to require that they take a stop at this sort of professional development and education. If we make it so that we're lowering the accreditation standards, or that there is an accreditation, will it still be that desirable path? Or is there, how do you reconcile that, I guess is my question.
I don't think that the accreditation path, when I was teaching at the Marine Corps University at the command and general staff level, I had just finished the War College. We did not have, we were not given a master, or we didn't earn a master's degree at that program. It was not accredited. Yet I was mentoring students in command and staff college that for master's degrees when I did not have one myself. So I think that is just not really an issue. The point that I think I was trying to make was, if you say to the best and brightest of our young officers, a tour on the faculty of a university, of one of the schools and one of our services is good for your career, as opposed to being something to be avoided, then I think that you will, just like joint duty was, all of a sudden overnight it became the thing that everybody wanted. And 2 weeks before that, you couldn't get anybody to sign up for a joint job. So
Thank you.
that does happen.
I get it. I appreciate
Gentlelady
it. Thank you, sir.
yields
Thank you,
back.
Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair.
See, Ms. McLean is next, but she's not here, so we'll move to Mr. Jackson of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Ranking Member Gallagher, for holding this hearing today. I share Ranking Member Gallagher's passion for providing oversight for reform in the future of professional military education, so I'm glad he had this hearing to take place today. I believe this is one of the most important topics that we can discuss here in this subcommittee. As a retired flag officer, I believe that we need to continue to invest in our people by providing adequate opportunities for development and growth. Yesterday, our committee received a briefing from Deputy Secretary Hicks on national defense strategy. During the briefing, she emphasized investment and modernization in our cyber and space capabilities. General, you helped stand up the Cybercom as the first deputy commander, so your expertise is a real asset to this committee. China's cyber capabilities are advancing rapidly each day, so I think it's important that we continue to educate our force about cyber in particular, because we will be such a critical component of the conflict in the Indo-Pacific should that happen. So, General, where do you see the largest gaps in knowledge in the department when looking at cyber? And further, what aspects of cyber should we implement in the curriculum at our PME institutions to ensure our forces are ready for the Chinese adversary?
Well, that's a great question, Representative Jackson. Thanks for asking it. So, in my time at Cyber Command and my time since then dealing with this issue, when I was on active duty and to today, where I'm on the advisory board at NSA, it seems to me that what we really need in our senior officers and our senior leadership, we don't want to turn them into computer scientists, but they do need to have enough of an understanding of the technology to be able to think through the implications of using that technology as a tool of national security. Because what we are seeing and what we have seen over the course of the last 15 years is that cyber capabilities can, in fact, have a big effect in some cases, on what you might think about for a national security strategy. So I think that it's important that we have some level of technical education, and the example from my own experience is being a pilot, right? I'm not an aeronautical engineer. I couldn't build an airplane. But I do know why, if I push the stick forward, the trees get bigger. If I pull it back, they get smaller. I understand who Bernoulli was, and I got all that. And I think we need people like that understand the world of cyber, and especially to realize that there's two different things we're talking about here. There's the pathways, if you will, of cyber, the way that we push bits and data through, and then there is what we can potentially do with cyber technologies that would be have some other effect on what we're doing. So it's a great and very timely question, and as you well know, the Chinese are active. And
yes, sir.
So.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I had another question was related. You answered most of that, actually. But I think it's really important, too, because I think the other thing it does is it gives us if we include this in the curriculum, it makes people much more competitive across the board for jobs when they get out of the military, because cyber is so important. Just, no matter what you choose to do when you leave the military, I think having a little bit of background in this and having this part of your professional military education is going to make life after the military a lot more competitive and a lot better for folks when they get out. So thank you. I appreciate both of you for being here and for your time. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
You want to yield to the ranking member?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
All right,
Yield back, Mike.
gentleman is
Can I
recognized.
ask a blunt question? Okay, so when we talk about like our top level war colleges, right? National War College, Naval War College. I'm not trying to get you to pick sides here. How do you think they stack up against top level civilian master's degree programs, right? Think SICE, Georgetown. I don't know what the latest ranking is. What do we have a way of assessing that?
Okay, so after I went through the Marine Corps War College, I decided that I wanted to get a master's degree because they were not issuing master's degrees, and I wanted to continue. So I applied and got accepted at American University, and I got a degree in philosophy. So here I am in a civilian university. I'm a 50-year-old or 47-year-old colonel wandering around, going to night school, trying to do this. Academically, I can tell you that it was the first 6 months of the Marine Corps War College at that time, 96, when we were doing strategy, was as in-depth as what I did in that master's program. The second 6 months of the War College, which were more of the joint force applied stuff, was not, it was more in people's comfort zones. But that was just my one snapshot experience into what that was. Jim?
I would argue that the PME can declare success when an officer is offered a chance to go to Harvard, Yale, SICE, or a war college, and they pick the war college.
I like the way you put that.
Because right now there is the perception that the degree from one of those civilian academic institutions is worth more. And part of that is, again, because these Harvard, Yale, SICE, they have very selective admissions, they're very rigorous, and the faculty at those institutions are not there to make the students comfortable. They are there to challenge them. General Petraeus going to Princeton was the first C he ever got, and it made him a better student. So I think it's really, the War College, the advantages that the War College brings is it has faculty with in-depth security experience who understands that they are teaching to practitioners. And they don't go in, when I teach theory, I do it knowing that my students don't even like the word theory. And I put it out there in a way that would be acceptable and they will learn from. I have to add to that too, a different view on accreditation. When the Naval War College was the first to accredit its program, we did not gold plate it. It was accredited the way it was. There is this myth that we can strip things away and have all this extra time, which is simply not true. And the reason it was accredited was because the students would come to Newport knowing they were going to pass PME. They were going to pass, everybody passes. So they would go to the local university to get a master's and come to class. And when you asked about readings, they were very sorry, but they didn't get to it because they had homework to do for their master's program.
Wow.
So accrediting those War College programs is to get their attention, at least in part. And if we don't have them accredited, we're going to go back to that idea that their attention is going to be split because they do want post-career master's programs.
That's right. Well, I thank the chairwoman for indulging me with that extra time.
So on the one hand, it would suggest that, first of all, in looking at the accreditation of the various war colleges, they're supposed to be accredited every 6 years, and some of them have not been accredited in a 6-year period of time. So I don't know how rigorous that accreditation process is. Are you familiar with it relative to the Naval
Yeah, they are accredited. The war colleges are accredited by the same bodies that accredit Harvard, Yale, wherever at Stanford, wherever it happens to be. What very often happens, these are academics. Academics come into a military environment and they are dazzled by the efficiency and the the stacks of books, and they are just, they're dazzled. That's the only word I can give you. And they are impressed by what they see, and rarely do they see problems. But
So
again,
for instance, the College of Naval Warfare, which is, I presume, under your, hasn't been accredited since May of 2015, and it's supposed to be accredited every 6 years.
I think a lot of that has to do with COVID. They would have been accredited, I'm not familiar specifically, but I would suggest it would have been last year.
All right. Other questions? I don't believe no, everyone else is off. Okay. Well, we really very much appreciate your participation today. It's been very valuable. Let me just ask one last question to each of you. If you could change anything in the war colleges today, what would it be?
Makeup of the administration.
I'm sorry?
The makeup of the administration.
Okay.
I would actually would tend to try to make them more academically rigorous. I think that challenge is something that we need to come to grips with, and I think that we need to think about the war colleges as a potential place for evaluation of senior officers as opposed to a place where we simply educate them. I think we have the opportunity to do both.
Do you think we should change this idea that no one gets a C and no one gets an A?
I think we could. My experience at grad school, the first semester I got a B minus. I thought my life was over at American. I couldn't believe it. What, a B minus? You got to be kidding me. I get A's in everything I do. But it's just a different standard. And it was the last B that I ever got. But it was there. And so I think that is, look, we're talking about type A people that are really competitive. And those are the folks that you want to come out of the war colleges and to continue to serve this country and to bring that disciplined focus to bear on all the problems we have, specifically the Chinese problem. But
All right. Again, thank you both very, yes. Ms. Jacobs, have you joined us? I don't believe so. All right. Again, thank you very much for your participation.
I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. All right, Ms. Jacobs, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much to our panelists. I would love to ask Dr. Johnson-Fries, the 2018 National Defense Strategy notes that PME across the board has stagnated, and a recent RAND study on Air Force PME found that in practice, the officers ranked most highly do not tend to attend PME at Air University, and officers do not give the quality of Air University schoolhouses a high ranking. What are the benefits, values of service level PME programs? What's special about the War College programs that sets them apart? And what is the current philosophy for officers assigned to PME programs like War College, Navy Postgraduate School, Air University, et cetera?
If I understand the question correctly, it's basically what they can get at what they can get out of it. Is that the question?
I think the question is, we've heard a lot that they don't, at Air University, they don't feel like they're getting high quality relative to other programs. So if you could just talk through some of the benefits and value of the programs and what sets them apart from other programs.
Well, I think, again, in order to have a quality program, you have to have a top quality faculty. And that gets into what I said repeatedly about having a more diverse faculty and more appreciation for the hybrid nature of the faculty. It also, in order to attack the question, you have to get to the previous question that was asked about grades. If I were to at one point in my career, I gave an officer a C, and I was called down to the front office and said, so Joan, the U.S. government has spent millions training this officer as a pilot, and now you want to ruin his career by giving him a C. And I said, what is the expectation? And the response was, the expectation is that you need to do a better job at getting this student to the level he needs to be at. And all faculty at war colleges know that, that it is not the responsibility of the student to do better, it's for the student to do good enough that we can get them through. So to go to the general's point, how do we get past that? How do we add the rigor without ruining a pilot's career because that person can't put two sentences together in a paragraph, in a written paragraph?
Yeah, and what role and relationship do you see the JPME system having with the civilian academic education system, especially in getting civilian help and support for providing research, educational resources such as courses, being a talent pipeline to try and supply future generations of cutting-edge scholars to work in the JPME system? Is there room for greater integration between the JPME and civilian university systems?
I think there should be. I think that's a great question. But again, they have been very insular because there is this difference of instilling rigor in challenging students or getting students through. But recently there has been a recognition that working with other institutions brings in specialties on China, on the Middle East, bringing in the expertise that you don't necessarily have. But it needs to be made clear to administrators that this is a good thing, and faculty should be rewarded, not punished, for their external associations.
Great. And with my last minute, are top performers being assigned to the system, or how are you doing officer assignments?
The services assign the students to PME on different systems. Some have to compete. Some are assigned. Some services feel that education is important and they will send their officers to education 2 or 3 times throughout their career, the Air Force. Others feel that any day you're not operational is a wasted day. So it's, I think, as the general pointed out, if PME is seen as a career enhancer rather than a career inhibitor, it could change dramatically.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your work, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The ranking member has one more question.
Well, I'm quite attracted to this idea of increasing the rigor. And I would argue if someone can't write a coherent sentence or paragraph in simple and direct prose, perhaps that's an indication that that person should not be promoted, particularly to a general or flag officer rank, right? Yeah. I mean, a lot of our frustration here is we get these documents from the Pentagon, and the Pentagon, they're like filled with acronyms and passive voice, and it suggests muddled thinking. Muddled prose suggests muddled thinking. I quite like this idea of raising the stakes, right? And that puts the pressure on a unit to make sure that before they send someone to a top-level school or an intermediate-level school, they're ready to go, right? Before, the Army sent Dwight Eisenhower to Leavenworth, they made sure he was ready, and when he graduated #1, it was a big deal, right? A big deal. And that gets to the type of prestige I think you're talking about, Dr. Freeze. So I don't know if there's a question in there so much as a comment, but I do think, I wonder, do you think we could do a better job of tracking graduates throughout the rest of their career? I mean, I've asked for some basic data on what happens to graduates from top-level schools, or how long are they staying in? What does it mean for their career? And thus far, I have not gotten the data. I just want to get your opinion on it.
The problem is, at schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, they boast about how many of their graduates have become president, won Pulitzers, won Nobel Prizes. Well, those are very much later in their career events. It's not right immediate after graduation. And that's the problem with education. Education is a long-term payoff. And because it's so difficult to measure, it sometimes pushes the military to training, because training, when Johnny came into the program, he could screw in 13 widgets in a minute, and when he left, he could do 35. He was trained. Education is very, very difficult to measure return on investment.
To your point, though, Ranking Member Gallagher, grades at the War College. So having sat on a number of promotion boards, in my experience, the only grade that really mattered is if you were the honor graduate in your class, that would welcome a line in a brief about who you were, and it made a difference. The rest of the crew, it didn't matter. The fact is you graduated from the War College. So whether you graduated with a C+ or a B-, at least in my experience at the promotion level, that was not necessarily a factor. The other interesting point you mentioned about muddled thinking and muddled writing, after I became a general officer, whenever I would go to a new job and I was looking for people that I could work with, literally one of the first questions I would ask is, do we have an English major on this staff somewhere? Because I just get tired of editing, and I used to have a stack of Strunk and White style manuals on my desk, and when people would come in and they'd hand me something to read, and I would make a comment on it, and I'd clip this book to it and send it back to this action officer and say, hey, I know you're not familiar with this book because I just read this paper, so it might help you. I personally think that rigor would be the competitors that you want, the meat eaters, the carnivores, they're going to chew on that, and they're going to want to be there, and I think that's a good thing.
May I add one thing? I teach at Harvard Extension School, and some of the classes I teach are called writing intensive, and that means with the subject matter I teach, I also teach writing. We could do that in PME, but it requires teachers who are good writers as well as substantively.
Well, I thank the chairwoman for indulging me and for this concern about ruining people's careers. Heck, we used to relieve people, routinely, and it was not necessarily a career ender. So part of that is we need a process for changing that as well. So again, I'm sorry. Thank you for.
All right. Well, you've been very helpful, and this is an area that obviously we want to spend more time. I actually think Congress has really not done a great job of the oversight it needs to do on PME, and I think the ranking member has brought it to our attention in a way that we will continue to do so. So we really appreciate you, General, and you, Doctor, for your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll now make the room right for our next panel. So we will recess for 5 minutes. And Chair? Yeah.
He went to the restroom now.
Oh, okay. We now welcome our second panel, and our first panelist is the Honorable Sean Skelly, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today to discuss matters related to professional military education and the National Defense Strategy. I thank the subcommittee for its part in sustaining a dialogue to discuss congressional ideas and concerns as well as DoD initiatives. Last December, our staff briefed the subcommittee on how the department has addressed shortcomings in PME and JPME as identified in the NDS. We plan to provide a follow-up report addressing your questions by June 15th. And as you have my written statement, I'll briefly summarize it. Since the start of the Biden-Harris administration, Secretary Austin has made clear that DoD will invest in our most significant strategic advantage, our people. In the newly released 2022 NDS, Secretary Austin emphasized three overarching ways in which we'll ensure our national security: integrated deterrence, campaigning, and building enduring advantage. Investing in the military education of our service members supports all three initiatives and is particularly crucial for building enduring advantage for the future joint force. Where training prepares our service members for certainty, PME prepares them for uncertainty. The goal of PME is to create leaders who can achieve intellectual overmatch against adversaries. That overmatch demands a system that prepares service members to address all contingencies. Unique to our institutions, PME provides officers with the opportunity to learn the state-of-the-art in military strategy and operational planning, which will continue to stand as the prerequisites to an understanding of the nature and conduct of warfare. PME also provides service members with the skills and knowledge to make sound decisions in progressively demanding command and staff assignments. It ensures they're ready for the uncertainty they'll face throughout their military career by providing critical knowledge on the ethos, culture, and core values of their service, the technical and tactical skills appropriate to how that service wages war, and most importantly, the wisdom and judgment to be applied in a broad range of situations across domains, theaters, and in both joint and combined operations with allies and partners. But military education policy is more than staff and war colleges. It's about continuous learning across all points of service, such as strengthening the ability of the services and future leaders to lead rapid adaptation and innovation, and to understand the potential use of all types of disruptive technologies. In a significant advance reflecting DoD's increased emphasis on PME, last month, the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness approved the first ever department-wide policy for military education. The policy details the structure for providing guidance to the services about curriculum and outcomes that graduates of military education programs should achieve, while preserving the impact and agility of our PME system that comes from empowering our institutions. This includes service-governed PME, chairman-guided joint PME, the service academies, and professional development opportunities, such as graduate education, fellowships, and training with industry. The policy establishes an oversight governance structure to assess PME effectiveness and evaluate the department's return on investment in military education by adopting an outcomes-based approach. Developing authentic assessments of what our officers and enlisted members can do with their knowledge will change the requirements from graduation from attended and graduated to meaningful standards, providing more granular data that supports talent management and ensures an appropriate return on investment. The instruction also promotes the integration of wargaming into the military education curriculum, advancing the Secretary's call for enhanced strategic thinking across the force by providing avenues for military personnel to practice their leadership, creativity, and problem-solving skills in scenarios closely resembling the national security challenges facing the nation today. Finally, the department must develop leaders that are responsible for taking care of our people, including tackling sexual assault and other harmful behaviors in the force. We're working to implement the training and education recommendations of the Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault in the Military across the department. PME helps forge the most professional fighting force in the world. Looking forward, DoD will increase the links between education and talent management, continuous learning, and professional development to enable intellectual overmatch against our competitors. Madam Chairwoman, this concludes my statement. I'm happy to answer any questions that you or the ranking member may have, and thank you for your continuing support of the women and men of our armed forces.
Thank you, Honorable Skelly. We'll now hear from Vice Admiral Stuart Munch, the Director of Joint Force Development the Joint Staff J7.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, including those that might be participating virtually. Appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, and further appreciate the support that Congress has provided for the funding of professional military education, as well as your oversight and your feedback. PME, of course, is critical, and I include in it knowledge, skill sets, critical thinking, and a network of like-minded individuals to the future success of our armed forces. Our current system largely stems from the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, further advanced by Representative Skelton's panel in 1990. That's resulted in a five-phase continuum for PME. Of that, the subset of joint professional military education has three parts of that continuum, and that's an intermediate level, senior level, and then the general and flag officer training and education. We recently also have added enlisted professional military education, which I know was raised by the prior panel. We're currently undergoing a transformation in PME driven by the 2018 National Defense Strategy. That resulted rather quickly in the Joint Chiefs' vision for guidance for professional military education and talent management. That vision then was codified in policy through the Officer Professional Military Education Policy, which we refer to typically as OPMEP. Recently here, a few months ago, also released the vision for enlisted PME, developing enlisted leaders for tomorrow's wars. And then that further for policy was ensconced in the Enlisted Professional Military Education Policy, or EPMEP. PME is focused on achieving the intellectual overmatch in order to have the warfighting advantage that we need to get against the adversary. Paired with that needs to be talent management so that the right students are attending and the right faculty are teaching. It also requires that we have a rigorous cycle of planning, executing, assessing, and then applying the feedback from what we've learned in that assessment to the subsequent planning cycle. That has not always been present in past PME, and with the effort on outcomes-based military education, we are now getting at that, where the objectives are more rigorous, the execution is being tracked closely. We've established metrics in order to be able to do assessments, and then, of course, applying that to make it better as we go on. In conclusion, I'd like to reiterate my thanks and also state that education is a force multiplier, and by way of maritime analogy, it's like a rising tide that raises all ships. So thanks again for your continued support, and we look forward to your feedback and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you both. Admiral, does the department survey PMA graduates about their experience with the program and whether it prepares them for future jobs?
Yes, students are surveyed.
Is it anonymous?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, they can volunteer their own identity if they would like.
How about the supervisor's views of whether PME sufficiently prepared their direct reports?
Yes, the war colleges do surveys. As was discussed in the prior panel, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between the intellectual attainment due to attending a war college versus learning on their own, self-educating, versus their life experiences. But we do the surveys, and we try to make those distinguishing characteristics identifiable.
Would you share some of those surveys with the committee, please?
At a later time, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
All right, thank you. Assistant Secretary, based on what you heard from the first panel, what do you believe we should be doing relative to the mix in administration and the faculty?
Madam Chairwoman, that's a great question as to faculty makeup is one that I don't have much experience in with regard to the execution of my responsibilities. As selection of faculty and the mix in there is with regard to the owning institution, the governing institution of that school, whether that be a war college or a staff college. What we do is we do set the policies in there, but we don't actually get involved with the selection of the actual professors.
No, I understand that, but you could certainly recommend that a third of the faculty or a third of the administration be persons who are not retired military or military.
With regard to the balance, yes, ma'am, we could, and we'd have to examine that to see where we would think, we do an evaluation. We might include that in our next, in a future upcoming study to see what a proper mix could be.
So the widespread perception that it's hard to earn an A at JPME, but even harder to get a C, feeding the notion that somehow you go there, you don't necessarily have to read the material, you got to show up and you'll be successful. How do we deal with, now that may be an older perception, maybe there's already been enough changes so that that's not going on, but to hear the previous testimony from Dr. Freeze, someone was actually going to another college to get a master's and also coming to the War College for, I guess, a program that was not going to represent a master's was kind of surprising to me.
It is to me as well, Madam Chair, and I wonder about the implications that having a dual track process within our war colleges might complicate accreditation for the side where degrees would be conferred. To have a mix of students potentially in some classes and on separate tracks in other classes, and how that might impinge upon the academic rigor for all, and how that might impact accreditation attainment. And I also wonder about creating two tracks. I know some of our allied partners have different tracks where folks can opt into a non-career track. As a former aviator, I often wondered about that because those folks tend to stay in the cockpit for a while, and would that be advantageous? And we're confronted with that challenge. Would I go after that? And I wonder how we would create a segregation. Within our system's not really set up. You're either tracking towards command until you're not, until you might find yourself in a tour or two that signals that you're not going to promote to 06 or 07 and beyond. But I would wonder about how we would adopt such a system into our current paradigm.
So Admiral Munch, what percentage of the curriculum is wargaming?
It varies, and if I could broaden the definition of wargaming to include other forms of practical learning, typically it's between a quarter and a third of what goes on.
How do you think we can make it more attractive as an assignment for high-performing officers who would have much to impart to their junior officers?
There's a series of issues there, ma'am. One of them is depending on the particular warfare specialty of officers, they can be very demanding in terms of the practical skills in operating what they operate. For example, pilots with jet aircraft, submariners with their submarines. And as a result of that, there's this tension between the time that needs to be devoted to developing the expertise and experience to operate those platforms safely and with warfighting expertise versus time spent doing something else while coming up in your career. And so there's where oftentimes you'll find people have to do night and weekend work in order to get the joint professional military education or the master's degree that was just discussed, because there isn't time in the career. So what the services other than the Navy do is that they make the Staff and Command College a screening mechanism for their best officers, as well as the War College, which is typically at the post-command level. The Navy's not had that culture to do that, and as a result of that have not had the same level of quality students that the others have had. So there's a policy choice to be made there. The Marine Corps made this transformation when General Gray was Commandant of the Marine Corps. He made it very firm he was shifting the policy. There were a few that didn't believe that he was as serious as he was, and then they essentially lost their careers.
So the GAO pointed out that the Navy was the only service that was not participating in JPME. Has that changed?
They do participate in PME. I think the GAO report was pointing out that they don't send sufficient number of students to the sister war colleges to be students and faculty to allow the acculturation that
Right,
we're looking for.
so you stand out by not doing that. And is that going to change? Or is there some philosophy behind not participating?
There are efforts ongoing to do better in that. I can't speak for the Navy at this point because I've been on the Joint Staff for 2 years, but I'm aware of there is activity ongoing, and that was also responded to in the OSD letter to you all.
All right, my time has expired. Ranking member?
Vice Admiral Munch, my understanding is you have a master's from Oxford, is that correct?
I do.
Can I ask you, at what point in your career were you able to do that, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so this is unusual. I wouldn't take it as the normal path. It was immediately after leaving the Naval Academy through a scholarship.
Okay. So you were actually good as an undergraduate, unlike me, who wasted a lot of time.
Well,
yeah.
I was from a small state and had to work hard, sir.
Absolutely. I guess, and we have a series of programs, and the Marine Corps is actually catching up. The Navy's been in the lead with the Air Force of sending people to go get PhDs at purely civilian institutions and then bringing them back and utilizing them. There were at least 2 active duty service members in my PhD program at Georgetown, one of which went back to be a strategist in the Pentagon, super smart guy. The other actually went to the Air War College down in Maxwell, I believe, right? Just both brilliant guys. Are you aware of these sort of programs? Do we feel like we're getting a good return on that investment? Because that's an even bigger investment, right? I mean, you're sending people away for potentially 2 years, and then they got to figure out how to finish their dissertation. That's a huge investment that we darn sure have to make sure we're capitalizing it on the back end. I'll maybe start with you, Admiral, and then Assistant Secretary.
It's uncommon around the Joint Force. It's more common in the non-maritime services where you'll see that. I think there's maybe a little bit more room in the career path to do something like that, as well as acceptability in selection boards as a desirable characteristic. There have been programs in the past in the maritime services that did more of that. It's just not very present right now.
Congressman, I think the new DODI, the Instruction 1322.35, which sets the conditions to create a data-informed approach to drive the return on investment evaluation at the departmental level. So the services have their reasons for pursuing it historically, culturally, as the Admiral alluded to. We need to understand how they're doing it differently, see what they think they're getting for return and what the department believes that the department's return on investment across the joint force should be there. We don't have the wherewithal to do that today. The question of PhD attainment came up in my meeting with the chairwoman yesterday, and we have to go do a data call on that, and it will take some time to bring back the numbers as they exist right now from the service military manpower systems.
And on that front, I very much appreciate you referencing my request for information in your testimony. I look forward to reviewing that data. Again, the intent is just to assure that we're making good use of those graduates, right? I think there are 2 kind of related issues that we're trying to figure, well, I guess maybe 3 that are coming out here. One is whether we are selecting the best and the brightest to go to these institutions. The second is whether the institutions themselves are on par with their civilian counterparts who have a much fancier name or credential, right? Like, let's just be honest. We had the previous panel talking about what it means to have a Harvard degree versus National War College. No offense to the National War College, although Princeton's better than Harvard. Just gonna throw that out there. And then the third, and perhaps most important, is how we're tracking our utilization of graduates. And it seems like right now you don't have the ability to pull up the numbers very quickly.
We certainly do not.
Okay. I just would argue in 2022, technologically, there's no barrier to it. We should be able to interrogate the data routinely in order to assess, okay, how are the services doing? Or reach down and say, okay, what are the report cards telling us about how our people are performing? Not in real time, but near real time.
Congressman, I'm sure you're aware of the emphasis that the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary have put on data across the department, that all data is available for the department's use. Recently, the Deputy Secretary directed that all models that include that data are also available for the department's use. We have to go there. We are making our way there. We're imparting that lesson, that expectation across the department, and I'm personally looking forward to taking the military education enterprise in that direction, because we're learning lessons as to how to drive accountability to make data available, to bring it together, because it's not just one service's data and displaying that, it's how you do the relationships, and then create that power in there. I know from my own experience, sort of the 3 questions that you raised, I saw all of them. I asked to go to Naval War College, to College of Naval Command and Staff, and the only reason it was entertained because I had time. Is what the detailer thought. And I had in my shop in the Pacific Command, I had a Hindi speaker who went to the Indian War College, and his counterpart in Central Command had gone to the Pakistani War College. It was back and forth. I had an Urdu speaker for India, and they had a Hindi speaker for Pakistan, because they didn't get assigned to where their imparted government-provided skills and training had taken them to. We have a history of not making the most out of that and being able to account for it beyond their payback tour. You get your education, you owe several years. But what do we do after that? Because we'll send you to some place to try and squeeze that out of you. But how do we know what we're getting as to who makes 3 stars, who makes more, who goes to particular commands that suit their training, or they just happen to wind up someplace? Especially with regard to cyber, AI, and other technologies that are emerging. We can only impart exquisite knowledge to so many. We have to ensure that they're put in places to utilize that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm out of time. Before I forget, however, one of those classmates I mentioned, my understanding is he's retiring soon. His name is Jeff Donathorn. So wherever you are, Jeff, you are one of the most brilliant scholars I've ever met, and a patriot, and you've served your country very admirably. So I'm going to miss your retirement ceremony, but maybe this will get to you through the ether.
All right, Ms. Bice, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member, and I appreciate the witnesses for their time this afternoon. Let me start with, it was mentioned actually in the previous panel, but I want to kind of circle back around and get your perspective. One of the key tasks of our nation's war colleges is to develop senior joint leaders who can successfully master cross domains of ground, air, space, and importantly, cyber operations. While we have made some positive strides, I feel strongly that our nation's warfighters need greater opportunities to expand their familiarity with cyber operations. So my question to the panel, does our nation's JPME curriculum do enough to prepare future senior military leaders to oversee operations in cyberspace, or that have a cyberspace component to them?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We know we have to do better because of the increasing importance and near dominance of cyberspace. Every operation we have relies upon the cyber environment. Every potential conflict or interaction that we might have with a peer adversary will certainly involve cyber in some way, shape, or form. Presently, we are studying, which is not action, but we are studying to learn where we have to do better on cyber education, and we are responding to the, I believe it's the committee's desire to learn more about NDU and cyber, and we have an in-depth study going on that right now. I would say from my personal experience in my 9 months in the department, is sitting on the department's cyber council, it's a confluence of the career civilian professionals who have the information operations, the information systems, the cyber knowledge, along with the senior operators and the cyber smart people, where we have to create a combined departmental effect to be able to operate in these environments. I have behind me my Deputy Assistant Secretary for Force Education and Training, and one of her key tasks is learning how to create literacy on a range of topics across the force, and how we understand what individual service members need based on whatever their specialty may be. What do they need to know about cyber? What do they need to know about a changing climate, data analytics, and also take that in a continual way across their increasing rank and responsibilities in there. We think it's key, and we are pursuing our ability to create that capability within our professional military education enterprise.
Thank you very much. To follow up on that, what can Congress do to further expand the opportunities for military personnel in this area of study? My colleague, Mr. Gallagher, and I have a focus on cyber, and so this is something I think that we haven't put enough emphasis on, but can now. So what can Congress be doing to help in this realm?
First, ma'am, I think we have a decent revisit rate on our curriculum between the services with the curriculum that they're responsible for, where the joint staff informs joint professional military education, those requirements. I believe our previous expert panel referenced cyber education, and it's the demands that the Department of Defense, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, places upon the system to be responsive to that. And we certainly rate cyber as an area of the highest importance for our force to understand and to be able to operate in that realm.
Vice Admiral, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yes, I would offer there are a couple of challenges in cyber that make it a bit different from the traditional domains. One is that it is a very rapidly changing field at all times. And so at any point you might think you have a grasp of what is in the realm of the possible with cyber, and very quickly it changes. So it requires, as individuals, a revisit rate that's very high relative to the other domains to really understand what it is capable of doing. With that high visit rate, there also is then a shortage of personnel who know how to do this that are in uniform. It's typically not a core specialty like it would be to be a pilot or a ship driver, but it's a secondary specialty. And we just don't have enough of those people. And when you don't have a critical mass, then you're not spreading the wealth of the knowledge through interaction throughout the joint force. So in terms of what Congress could do, I think it's a bit of it is just the nature of the beast in that it's a very fast-moving field. But we're trying to make cyber more robust in all aspects of PMA in order to grow that mass of people who really understand it. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me just quickly follow up with, I think it's crucial that we find those service members that have this background and develop them and keep them in the service, because every day that goes by, the cyber component of operations becomes more and more critical. And without those individuals, we'll continue to fall behind. Madam Chair, thank you for the time. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. I have just a couple of more questions. We'll allow for a second round. Assistant Secretary, we have required, I believe in the NDAA of 2 years ago, that women, peace, and security be included in the curriculum. And there's growing recognition that that is a key component to successful national security. What are you doing at your level to make sure that this is, in fact, not lost in the process?
Excuse me, ma'am, the mic is winning. Women, peace, and security is a curriculum area. If I could ask the Admiral to weigh in, I know the Joint Staff has a priority on it, or has it in its rank of priorities for curricula across the Joint Force. But we agree it is NDS, the former NDS directed, and I believe it's within my colleagues in OSD policy that have responsibility to ensure that the Joint Force is meeting the requirements of the demands of women, peace, and security.
But let's say it doesn't happen. Let's say it just falls off. Who then is accountable to make sure that that is included in the curricula?
Ma'am, that's where governance would come into play. That we have, it wouldn't just be me as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness who has responsibility for the lead for our education programs. It's to ensure that the entirety of the Office of the Secretary brings all of its equities to bear, where it would be the principal cyber advisor to the Secretary. It would be the Undersecretary for Policies, folks who have space responsibilities as well as cyber, as well as those who have WPS as an example, to ensure that those that they have subject lead on are being accounted for within the education enterprise, which is where I don't mean to beat the dead horse of the new instruction, providing a data foundation that we can then take into a governance model. And where we can use the authority of the Undersecretary for Personnel, who can order much of what needs to be done responsibly through the department. And if we can't reach resolution, we already have a standing forum to reach the Deputy Secretary of Defense on workforce matters, which is what education would fall under in that way. But it would be my responsibility as the lead for the education enterprise to ensure that all those equity stakeholders bring their issues to the fore and ensure that they're being held to account through our wherewithal within PNR.
Admiral, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, ma'am. So the service war colleges would be accountable through the services. National Defense University would be accountable through us on the Joint Staff. And through the outcomes-based military education effort, we do a regular assessment on the curriculum to make sure that it includes the requirements and it is relevant and current. And additionally, just for JPME, there is an accreditation process that's separate from the accreditation that go to the other war colleges that are done by civilian accreditors. And so that's another item we look at for the JPME accreditation.
So the 2018 NDS recognized that professional military education had come to be valued more for the institutional requirement of having attended a program and received credit than for the knowledge, skills, and abilities fostered and developed. What are we doing to change that? Assistant Secretary?
Chairwoman, that is what the new DoD instruction is all about, is the direction that all programs will be objectives-based military education that will then result in data, which we then have to, I mentioned it in my opening statement, it's talent management. It's not just the data itself, and governing through that data is not the whole solution. We have to have a personnel management, talent management system that can understand the attributes that all our service members bring when they assess, whether through their high school graduation or their bachelor's degree, what we impart to them through the education programs they go through, either at the tactical level when they're more junior, then when they go to staff colleges and work colleges, what we intend to impart to them, what they take away, what they demonstrate through their competencies in there. That's the way we have to get after it. It's the data, it's the objectives of the education, understanding the impact of it, and then attributes to the individuals to create an appreciation of the force and whether we have the sufficient knowledge and wherewithal for the positions that need it. It has to be a continual cycle.
The first panel talked about creating greater rigor in the actual curriculum. From your vantage point, how do you make sure that in each of these war colleges there is the requisite rigor in terms of the program?
Ma'am, I think it would be through the objectives that are set and how they're measured and what the services believe they need out of them, what the Joint Staff believes we need from JPME and an OSD assessment, and revisiting those based on, you raised the point about the surveys from those receiving commands, the senior service staffs, the combatant commands. Are they feeling satisfied? And through any place where we have oversight, is the force performing to meet the demands of the mission and the environment in the world at that time? We can never stand still. It's about continuous process improvement.
So my last question, the previous panel talked about how if you bring in a lot of retired military officers, they are teaching from their experience. So they're providing an educational experience that relies on yesterday's war and not the future. How are we going to make sure that we keep the curriculum looking at the future of war and not what's happened before? I'll start with you, Admiral.
Yes, ma'am. So there's really a broader issue in the federal employment in that there is a strong benefit for veterans in hiring practices, and that does occur also then in the war colleges that results in veterans having a larger preponderance than maybe they would otherwise because of the point scoring scheme and hiring federal workers and the benefits that veterans get. So it's a bit of a broader issue than just PME. But how do we ensure that they're focused on the future? Well, traditionally in academia, publishing is a key metric for promotions within the academic institution. There could be more rigor that is added there. And then I mean, it's not been in my experience that they're all backward looking. There is some value in history and in experience, but and to tie to some of your earlier questions here about the value of the War College and the rigor, we did go through a period of a couple decades where we did not have an adversary that was especially strong or existential against us. And there's nothing like a threat to focus an institution. And so along with this transformation that we've described, there's a deep-seated transformation ongoing because of the students' interest in being ready for their responsibilities to fight China if that comes, or Russia.
So does that mean there's a China hands in the future?
I don't know about that. Anytime we create a sidetrack like that, it tends to only last for a while, and then the larger needs of the service eventually overcome that, and it chokes it off. So I'd be concerned about losing quality people to.
Well, I guess I would disagree with you, because I think, as we're seeing in many of our other entities, building a Russia and China focus is critical to building the kind of talent we want and the leadership we want. Assistant Secretary, your final words, and I've really exceeded mine, and then I'll give you the opportunity.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I share the Admiral's concerns with regard to a hands program that could unduly silo off folks. I believe wholeheartedly we have to raise the rigor with regard to our competitors and the specifics, and we have to focus, I think, in three parts: strategic competition writ large, though I don't think any new strategic competitors are probably coming out of left field anytime soon, but it's the basic demands of strategic competition. What's particular to the China problem set, China's unique attributes in their military, what their military presents, as well as likewise Russia. Russia is likely not to leave the stage anytime soon. We certainly need folks who can speak the language and who understand the tactics and what are appropriate to the positions that require a level of increased understanding and specific knowledge, whether it be intelligence, operations, planning, and the like. I believe that's appropriate. Personally, I would like to see, and I will look after this to understand what the lessons learned and evaluation of the success of the AFPAC HANDS program was, because, as the Admiral said, it was a large effort that just about the time it gained real momentum and mass, it got sidelined and stovepipe. And I have acquaintances that I served with, squadron mates, who wound up adrift with a language and an expertise, and they had done one tour, and they still had a career, a good chunk of a career in front of them. And that way, I'm always be wary of how we can impinge upon the service's ability to make use of the talent available to it if we put it off in a direction that loses favor with leadership.
All right. Ranking member, final question?
Thank you. Well, my understanding, to pick up where you left off, I thought we were making changes to JPME to reflect China as the so-called pacing threat. Many quibble with that language.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The idea being that, go back to Rooster's days and every naval officer could tell you everything about the Soviet Navy. We need a similar level of expertise for the PLA Navy, right? Are you hamstrung by Goldwater-Nichols in making those changes?
Sir, I don't believe so. I was just down on the Norfolk waterfront with a soon-to-deploy destroyer crew and captain, and they were talking about Russian and Chinese assets in the same ways that, as you mentioned, as we Cold Warriors once did. The Soviet ships became Russian ships, so the same with the aircraft. But they had that focus on the high-end adversary, as I remember having myself.
And then shifting gears, I want to highlight what I think is one pocket of excellence that I found interesting. SOCOM has partnered with MIT and created this course where they're sending 06s to a short-term, tailored course, not a master's degree granting course. It could be a micro-master's if that's now a thing, where the idea is not to turn them into technologists, but give them basic fluency in AI, ML, quantum, cyber. That's intriguing to me. Are you aware of this effort?
I am not. I will become so after this immediately.
I'm sure if MIT will answer your call, Assistant Secretary Skelly. I was very impressed by the idea. Again, we're not creating a separate thing. MIT was eager to partner with SOCOM in this regard, and it just seemed like a great symbiosis between DoD and to civilian higher ed.
And Congressman, I certainly applaud it because it goes back to the point I made about literacy. What do you need to know for the position you're going to, and how can we impart that right amount for the job to you in that time and see it coming to make you available, that you're going to go to a particular field or a particular staff or service level position, that we know what you need to do, especially with AI, cyber, machine learning, and the like, because it's coming into play to how we do everything. Our service members are doing it themselves in the course of their jobs, where they can get the permissions to bring those capabilities to bear. It's much like we were when we were all coding, not I wasn't, but much younger folks were all coding 15, 20 years ago. They're doing data analytics now on their own work and trying to bring that to bear the performance of their duties.
And what would be in light of the previous discussion we had about academic rigor, what would be the barriers to posting class rankings, on making that publicly available? Are there some concerns but beyond embarrassing people that don't perform well, would there be some legal barrier or regulatory barrier I'm unaware of?
So there's some Privacy Act issues with displaying grades and rankings like that.
Interesting.
Let's
follow up
in
on that.
legislation, yeah.
You may be right. I'm not willing to just accept that necessarily. I don't think it would be a bad idea to sort of post that information publicly. I don't know.
The other way to get at the issue I think you're after here is to do actual fitness reports for students based on their performance.
Or use a carrot instead of a stick, right? Give the top 10% or 25% graduates preferential treatment in terms of their follow-on assignment, right? That could be a powerful incentive.
Yep.
Since I have a minute and 36 seconds left, I've already crossed the threshold of half-baked ideas, and we may have to wait another 5 years before we have a PME hearing. Then I will sort of lay out a series of more provocative statements. My emerging view is that if we're going to try and give someone a highly technical skill set, we should probably just send them to a civilian institution rather than recreating something on our own. We probably get more bang for our buck. And might create interesting friendships and relationships with civilian experts in AI, quantum, or advanced engineering. As we look towards what the military can do uniquely well, I don't know. I mean, ask yourself if our current programs would be better or worse than a year, half of which involved a writing boot camp with a sort of near religious reverence for Strunk and White, and teaching field grade officers and potential general grade officers how to write clearly and well, and another half year of intense wargaming tied directly to testing our war plans. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not asking you to answer that question, but the fact that part of you is even questioning it right now in your minds, as I know you are, means we got some work to do.
Writing boot camp, something akin to, was in my feedback to the Naval War College when I was in the middle of my combatant command tour.
Yeah.
I was not prepared to be a staff writer, staff officer in that way. There's a there, sir.
So I'd go one more than that. I would offer a three-part process. One is to institute a tutorial process where it's one professor on one student or one on two. That is expensive, but that's how you really grow critical thinking with that kind of contact. That can be, say, once a week, twice a week. And then I would do classroom work in the mornings with rigor, and then I would do practical application of the learning in the afternoon with wargaming. And then to broaden that cycle, what is learned then, much like the interwar period that was done at the Naval War College, send that learning out to the fleet, to the operating forces, to open it up to the joint force, and do a large exercise in the off-academic period in the summer to test out those ideas in order to advance war plans, send that feedback back to the war colleges, and then begin the cycle again.
If we do all these things and then outlaw the use of acronyms, the Chinese cannot beat us, I guarantee you. So,
All right. Ms. Bice, do you have any follow-on questions? You do? You're
Madam Chair, I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, you've given us a lot of food for thought. As you can tell, we both have great interest in wanting to pursue PME and JPME to get the biggest bang for our buck. This is not a year in which you can relax and enjoy your family. It shouldn't be that. Now, hopefully that has changed. But I do think there's more work that needs to be done. And I think the ranking member's suggestions are ones that we should pursue. The other thing we should also look at, we do have the military academies that are filled with fine academic teachers, professors, and maybe we need to rely on them somewhat more in terms of evaluating what we need to do differently. But we really appreciate your participation today. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Skelly. Thank you, Vice Admiral Munch. And we will stand adjourned.